right. Well, hello, Gretchen. Welcome. Thanks so much for joining me. Thanks to everybody here. Before we begin, I would like to state that UX Copenhagen is a safe stage for everybody and for different voices and different opinions. So we do not tolerate any harassment or any discrimination. And especially now I'm thinking about the Q&A session. And yeah, so it's a safe place and we want everybody to feel safe here. And also, Gretchen, if there's anything that you don't want to talk about, like if I ask a question, just feel free to say we're not going to go there. There's the thing is that I've lived in Denmark for 30 years now. So I've become very blunt and very Danish. And sometimes I just kind of say things, you know. So if there's anything that I say wrong, just please know there's no ill intent and that, you know, I'm going to mute everybody here. There we go. Okay. I should not have muted Gretchen, of course. Hold on a second. Gretchen, can I ask you to unmute yourself?
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Totally. There you go. No worries.
Here we go. All right. So the background for these talks is that whenever I have this initial conversation with a potential speaker, the subject always goes all over the place and it's always really interesting. And I've always wished that I had recorded, you know, some of these talks because it's just so interesting. So I thought, well, why not invite an audience and see how that goes? Because maybe, you know, other people than me think it's really interesting. And also it gives a bit of background for how I choose the speakers and, you know, what the speaker is going to be talking about at UX Copenhagen. So that's about it. So the agenda is that I'll do a quick introduction of you and then we will dive into the topic and just, you know, chat as if we were just you and I just having a good chat. And then we'll invite the audience in to ask questions in the last 15 minutes or so. And we've got questions going on Slido. I would suggest that, you know, if Gretchen, of course, you're welcome to look at them, but it gets distracting sometimes. So I'll just read out. I have Ulrika helping me with the questions. So, you know, I'll read them out to you.
Sounds good.
And that's about it. So everybody, please welcome Gretchen Anderson, author, independent UX designer. What else can I say? Oh, somebody just joined. Hi, change the background. That's funny. So we're introducing Gretchen Anderson from Oakland in California with a new puppy that might wake up. And Gretchen and I got to talk, actually last year you sent me a talk proposal, I think, for ethics and designing for good. And I think that, you know, the book that you wrote is also, you know, the Mastering Collaboration just fits in really well with the theme for 2021, which I think I said last year also. So we'd like to hear more about your book and more about, you know, future plans for other books maybe, or and then a whole lot more about what you would talk about here at UX Copenhagen.
Yeah, well, thank you for that introduction, Hel. It's very nice to meet you. And I was just saying I was there about a year ago and I heard of you were looking for talks. I thought, I got to come back to this place. Let me talk to this lady. So yeah, I wrote in early 2019, I released Mastering Collaboration, which here, Mastering Collaboration from O'Reilly. And that's a book, kind of a really tactical, kind of practical guide to improving collaboration. I wrote it because at the time I was working in a big company. I'm not a big company person. And my job was to like change the culture, which I now realize is like kind of a impossible task, at least for one person. But there was a lot of good intention around increasing collaboration and working agile and all of those things that people talk about. There wasn't a lot of actual execution. It was sort of like, we're going to collaborate here. Fred, Jane, go in a room. What, you're not done yet? You know, and just a lot of like, I want all the benefits, but I don't really know how to support it. So I did some research into that. I also teach at CCA. I teach the senior studio. So kids who are graduating into the work world, and they don't get a lot of education either about, you know, how do you, especially I'm a product designer, like how do you know, really bring ideas. It's never one person's idea that gets done by one person. You know, it always takes a multitude of people. And so how do we teach young people, older people, how to work better together was sort of my goal. And so I wrote that book, and then since then, with in 2020, with the changes, I definitely came around writing that book to asynchronous and remote collaboration is not only not bad, in some ways it could be better. But here we are living in the middle of it, and I think I've heard from different people, different experiences. I certainly think there was a group of people for whom it is better. I think there's a group of people for whom it doesn't really work. And I'm always interested to talk, and I'd love to hear from you all, like what's your experience been? Because, it depends on what job you do. I have a client that actually are essential workers. They work in the kind of military industrial complex. So they like never stopped going to work. And it's very interesting to see how their dynamics still have.
I muted you again. I'm sorry.
No worries. Even though they're not working over Zoom, like there's still some shifts. And, so like I said, I'd love to talk more about that. And then the other thing I would say is, I think, you're a mechanical engineer, right? I have done some physical product design. And that really, I think, is maybe where I began my passion for collaboration, because there for sure, you've got to have a good partnership as a digital designer to industrial designers, but also the industrial designers and the engineers. There's always this really healthy tension.
Yes.
And I think for industrial design, you could boil it down to, that's nice, dude, but what about the laws of physics, right? Like, and the way that is delivered, whether it is a loving, joking thing or I'm really irritated that you are not taking the rules of physics seriously, right? So I think there's something about, you need someone to bring the rules of physics to bring your thing together, but can you do that in a way that is productive?
Yeah.
I don't know what your experience has been.
No, I see it the same way, exact same way. I see the UX designer as like the link between, marketing and development, or the link between, everything basically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think having that user-centered approach can be really helpful, I find, because I think I've come around to, I'm more of a midwife of ideas at this point, especially in my career. Like I don't do a ton of like super detailed hands-on work. But my ability to frame things from the user's perspective provides everybody a common ground to come in, right? Executives can take that point of view, engineers can take that point of view. I mean, hopefully, potentially, it doesn't privilege any one internal person's point of view. And so I definitely milk that for all it's worth.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I think the two things I've, wanted to kind of talk about today was just the idea of what's changed in our new context, and that idea of like, how do we really explore ideas? In the Google Sprint book, there's this idea of alone together, which I think is really relevant right now. Like, you need some time. We always, I think, struggled when we were sitting next to each other to find alone time to do work versus together time. I think that's even more interesting right now. And then just like, how do you build trust? I have, my students are starting jobs, onboarding on Zoom. It's tough, right? It's tough to think about how that, And I mean, I think people's personalities do come through remotely, but there's some real opportunity there. I've started doing some interesting work in that area, just around like supporting people being people, not even like workshopping their product ideas. So.
Right. Oh, that's super interesting. Yeah. Because that's definitely, that we pivoted to online this year for the conference in like 2 weeks, which was insane. But, the thing that was really missing was the people interaction, no doubt about it.
Mm-hmm.
That's also something that I learned from that, is that people really want to see each other. I mean, we're like, especially back, when it was really bad in March and April. I mean, it looks like it's getting worse now again, but back then we were like seriously locked in our houses, right? So people just were so hungry to meet other people. And so one of the things I learned was that, we do these online workshop or hands-on workshops, which were all online. And the thing that was really popular with them was that, you could be sent into breakout rooms and meet other people. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've been doing these block printing workshops. It's just, the point is like, everybody come around, it's like just kind of mindless enough that you can have an activity to do together that's creative. And I find my students too, like I only, my class is 16 students, but if I try to ask them, have a conversation, it does not happen. I stick them in breakout rooms. I come in and they're like,
Yes.
can't get enough.
Right.
So it's just creating
Right.
that good space.
Yeah. So you mean in real life they don't talk if you say
No, in the
say
whole group, right? In a whole group, they don't talk, but in smaller groups and groups
yes.
where there's no authority, which I think is a big part of
Yes.
collaboration, like perceived or real.
Yes.
That's a key component too.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it?
No one wants to be
But
like
like you
big
said
brother.
before, yeah, like you said before, it's good for some people and then probably not so good for others. But you said it was good for certain types of what did you say? I think you said it was for like certain roles that it was
Well, I mean, I
good.
think it depends on how groups make decisions. So,
Mhm.
I'll just share kind of anecdotally. There's groups who I think have had to transition into maybe more documentation or almost like a slow down to go fast thing, which we always told ourselves, but we kind of were forced to do that because you had to work extra hard to make sure, do we all understand what we're saying? Are we all on the same page? And that paid dividends before, it definitely pays dividends now. What I notice people struggle with is people who were used to being able to walk into a room and kind of by fiat make something happen that's harder to do over Zoom. Like your square is just as big as everyone else's. And so I just think that tension is also interesting.
Yeah. So tell me more about your book. How do you even go about writing a book? I'm so amazed at people that write books. I cannot imagine finding time to write a book.
Yeah, it's interesting. I also had a full-time job when I pitched it and then quit that job and, spent more time writing it, which I don't know how I was going to write it with a full-time job. But honestly, I did the thing that I think lots of people say, which is I made sure to write every single day. And,
Okay.
an hour to 2 hours, that was really all I had in me.
Yeah.
Some days not a lot happened, some days a lot happened, but I found that like sitting down every day was super important. And a couple 3 times I gave myself a week off and it always turned into a month. And it was fine. Like it didn't like totally derail me, but it was interesting that like I also needed time to be like, I can't right now. And then I'd come back kind of fresh. You
Okay.
forget 200 pages is a lot. It's not even that big of a book, but compared to like, I could do a whole design system and kind of keep it all in my head because I want it to be simple enough that it's conceivable. But with the book, my first draft, the feedback I got was like, girl, you've said this already like 10 times, like move that anecdote somewhere and stop telling it, just kind of keeping me on track of the flow. It was pretty fascinating.
Wow.
And
Oh
yes, I wrote
wow,
a book
that's
about
really
collaboration by myself, which everybody makes fun of me for, but somehow it seemed easier.
yeah. That's a good point. Okay. Also, I love that you say you're like a midwife of ideas. That's really funny.
I think when I was younger, I spent a lot of time wanting to have the big idea. I see this in my students of this idea of like, I want the cred, I want the points, I want the whatever they think is they're going to get, which at a
Mhm.
certain point you realize it's not how this works. And, really it's about getting the right idea, not having, it was really humbling when I started to get into a place where I could see the data from the usage against things that we launched. And that just removed me from the theoretical into the real world of like, oh, that didn't work. And I have to be humble about that. And so, I think that experience led me to believe everyone's got something to contribute. And so how can you channel that productively? Even if it's criticism, right? If you can view criticism as like, well, that was a test in a way. It tested that idea. It wasn't clear, whatever, it's not making sense, too
Yeah.
complicated, all of that.
Yeah. That's interesting. So, how long have you had your own consultancy?
I've been doing this now off and on since 2015. I did this stint at PG&E, which it's on here. I used to work with there, which is our big utility. Um, and then I realized that I wanted to go back to working on my own because I'm just more successful as an independent consultant, I think you are saying you're very blunt. I am also very blunt, and I'm not like the empire building type. And I think you need to be in that environment. So I'm more effective coming in as an outsider and saying, like, here's my truth. What you decide to do with it, it's on you. I think I've also realized you can't make people do things. You can give them really strong arguments, but.
Yeah, which is actually what you started saying, is that changing culture from the inside is impossible for one person. So we probably shouldn't name any names, but there's so many of these, internet companies that are like, yeah, well, we're working for these, white bros, but we're doing it because we're doing change from the inside. How do you feel about that?
I mean, I get the optimism, and I think somebody's got to try. I think you owe it to yourself to ask at some point, like, am I getting the outcomes that I really want? I worked in nonprofit education, and I eventually came to the realization that I don't know that we're on the side of the good here. I worked for a nonprofit that uses data to kind of give parents a sense of school quality. And I think now it's much more obvious that that is really problematic. But at the time, I was sort of like, well, this could be a good way to use digital information to engage people and making a system better. And I think I came around to, it's just, there's too many Walmart families, whatever, Walton families with tons of money funding what they want to have happen. And so, can I really change that situation? After a couple, 3 years, I decided I couldn't. And again, work more now as an advisor to help people think through decisions. Education is such a local issue that you have to be super inclusive, even if you already know what you're going to do. You see this in government all the time, but they're going to workshop that policy decision over and over, even though it's essentially been made, because you've got to bring people along. And again, it's that long tail game, which is necessary, but not my core strength.
Right. Yeah, that's super interesting. I think we've already got some questions. Should we just dive into those? Because we might as well. It's probably something that's related to what we're talking about right now, right?
Yeah, go for it.
Question one is, are there any tendencies you've noticed while teaching online, like the one you mentioned with students being more talkative in breakout rooms on Zoom?
Yeah. So I teach what would normally have been students in San Francisco are now distributed around the world, which is, good and bad. I noticed when that happened last spring, students whose command of English is not great actually benefited in some ways because I had to put more things in writing. I speak very quickly. I use a lot of idioms. I feel for them. So I think in some ways being really diligent about writing down what you're going to say and kind of giving them both written and oral ways to get information has been super helpful for my students. Regularity. I notice this because I have young kids also that are in school digitally, and like one Zoom number, one classroom, whatever, to the extent that you can simplify. And I think a lot of educators normally would err on the side of communicate in all the ways. And I think that we're getting the message of like, it's too much. You've got to have one way to do this or things fall through the cracks.
Yeah.
And then I think this is hard for different age ranges because again, I teach adults, but even my middle-aged kids, giving them the autonomy rather than this accountability mindset. Like, what does taking attendance mean? Like if somebody comes from 1 a.m. to 3 a.m. in Seoul, Korea to my class, I am so grateful. And if they don't and they opt to watch a video later, like that is fine, right? So thinking differently about punishing the like you forgot that assignment or you didn't attend to, did you get the outcome you wanted, right? Back to that outcomes thing of like, did you learn the material?
Yeah.
I think is pretty important.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I noticed that with going online with UX Copenhagen this year. I had to send out like probably about 5 or 7 emails beforehand, because things kept changing and changing. And I just noticed people do not read the emails at all. So, you really have to, I don't know, like you said, you have to be pretty concise and just really try to just save it to one single line, one single Zoom meeting, one single classroom. Yeah. All
I
right.
think before you could get away with, you pass someone in the hallway and Jonathan's like, oh, are you going to that thing at 11? You're like, oh, whoops, I didn't know about that, but thanks. Or
Mhm.
whatever, like those safety nets aren't there.
Right. Yep. Okay. Question 2. What is your experience with things that can prevent good collaboration from happening? Do you have any anecdotes or stories?
Don't we all?
Yeah.
I mean, I think I was saying that I was inspired when I was at PG&E. I was inspired to write this because there was an executive there who I really admired, and I was watching them try to pull off a reorganization, and they had put together this presentation that was just lovely about how it wanted participation and the operating principles and the criteria for a good solution. And I was really excited. And then the last minute was like literally last 5 minutes of a meeting full of directors and above. It's an expensive meeting. It was, here's the new org. What do you think? And can you explain it to your people? And I was like, what was that whole song and dance for the last 50 minutes?
Right.
Like either skip that and let's workshop your idea or tell us that that's the idea. But doing both, I think really leads you into failure. So being really clear with people about here's what we're trying to achieve. Here's the kind of participation I'm looking for, being really clear, especially with like executive stakeholders. You're going to give them periodic chances to weigh in on things, but you're not letting them design the product.
Right.
You're giving them a role to comment um, and give feedback, right? So something I find useful there is to make sure you're really clear with those people. You're not the user. Like keep that user focus, even if they think they are the user. I think probably most of us know it's easy to think that you're the user and not. There's a
Especially if you're
great,
the boss.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, at PG&E, a lot of those, if not all of those executives were once guys climbing poles and digging trenches. Now they have fancy glass walled offices. And so they're still a long way from what they used to do.
Right.
Um, I heard a funny story. Trisha Wang was working for like a detergent company and they were trying to focus on people who use laundromats. And so they're sitting in the middle of the country somewhere talking about how horrible it is to have to do laundry. And she was like, have you guys ever seen a laundromat? Have you ever been, like, let's just go to a laundromat to realize when you have to use the laundromat, you can't afford to be like, this is the worst place in the world. You're like, I come here every week. There's like a singles scene and there's kids playing and, and these people's eyes were like, oh, wow, we had no idea. So I think if you can show people, connect them to that distance in an empathetic way is useful too.
Yes, definitely.
And then I always talk about, how do you give feedback and take feedback well? And so I really try to, especially with my students, like it depends on where you are in the process, but um, focus on questions. Focus on asking good questions of the person rather than trying to give the answer. Because I think we've all been in the meeting with the person who's like, what about, and then they like monologue for 20 minutes about their idea, which probably lacks context and whatever else is like not helpful. And so the cheapest framework I have is I say, I like blah, blah, blah. I wish I knew blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
I like the e-commerce concept. I wish I knew how it scales or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
That really helps people get actionable feedback. And that's a phrase I try to teach people, especially executives. I want actionable feedback. And if you can't give that to me, that's fine. I will turn it into that. But
Yeah,
it's helpful to coach people as you go.
definitely. Or something else that's helpful is telling the executive to like not start off the meeting by saying, this is how I think the solution's going to be, but let's workshop. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Okay.
sometimes will like teasingly make fun of them. Like, I know you already know the answer, but please be patient with all of us to like make it together.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think even most executives I know have had the experience of being like, make me a blue hexagonal 6-foot long thing. And then you come back and they're like, well, what I meant was a thing to solve this problem. And you're like, ah. So I,
Right.
again, try to teach people like, even if they give you the super specific order, it's worth backing up to like, and not really blue. That's not a helpful pushback, but like, it sounds like you're trying to solve this problem. Is that right? Oh, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
having a good sense of humor always helps.
Always helps. Definitely. All right. So here's another question. How much collaboration is enough? Is enough collaboration? And when is it becoming too much? How do you measure it to keep the balance?
That's a great question. I don't know about measuring it, but I mean, what I always say is if you could just go off and do it, then you should probably just do it. So Kate Rudder actually helped me come up with a framework when I was writing the book of there is on one end of a spectrum, we'll call cooperation. So if we're going to make a fence, I'm going to dig a hole, you're going to stick a post in it, somebody's going to lay a slat. There's no mystery. You can just cooperate. So if you can do that, you should just do that. And the other spectrum is like maybe two designers really wrangling through like, how does this pixel exactly fit? But when you have like people with lots of different skill sets and lots of different perspectives, which you want, that's when you want to collaborate. And so, again, I would say enough is setting everybody up at the beginning with good objectives. So everyone knows what we're going to do. That's a big mistake I see, which everybody is like, okay, we assembled the team. We all know what we're doing, right? Let's just go. And then 2 weeks later, a sprint later, you start looking at artifacts and you're like, whoa, wait, hold on, let's back up. So just getting people all set up on here's the outcome we want. And then allowing periodically for people to kind of come in and I call it like put their fingerprints on things. Like even at PG&E, we were kind of making things for lots of different groups, even though we knew they were all at core the very same similar thing. Every time we went to a new group, we built more connections. We found more users to test with. We got more input, not that it radically changed stuff, but all of that was helpful. And so seeing those moments as potentially fun, interesting ways to get people to put their fingerprints on things. That's kind of my baseline. If people are getting fatigue, it's probably gone on too long. If things aren't changing, like there's nothing worse than calling everybody together and being like, we moved the menu to the left. People are like, oh, who cares?
Right.
So kind of framing up like, if this was an episode of Lost, previously on Lost, what happened? And do we have enough material or is this going to turn into like the smoke monster bear that never comes back again, right? So we got a plot here that we can bring people along.
Yeah.
And I also think it's useful. Yeah, you just watch that? I think I'm going to rewatch it.
No, don't. It's terrible.
No. Oh, no. Darn it. I had hopes. Another suggestion I have is to think clearly about when you, again, want people to participate with you and when you just need to keep them informed. And so I think a lot of the tools right now, especially for digital designers, I'll just speak, being able to have prototypes that live somewhere that people can reliably go to so that you don't have to have big sprint reviews or like always be facilitating that interaction can go a long way. Obviously it takes time to build people's awareness up of like, oh, that's where the latest prototype lives and I can go check it out or show it. That getting people invested in that is useful.
Right. Do you use certain tools? Do you use like Figma or?
I use Figma, InVision, PowerPoint sometimes, kind of depends on the situation. But I've been using Figma. Again, I'm not like, I don't do a ton of detailed UI design anymore, but I'm often working, like I'll hire students or other designers. And again, that collaboration is important. I have to be familiar enough with the tools that I don't make them leave their tools to present to me every time.
Yes. Yeah, I hear you. I've just recently started using Figma and I love that you can collaborate in the tool, I guess you can in InVision too. And I think Adobe XD also, but I just love that idea of actually, and it doesn't matter where you are in the world, you can just kind of go in and do some changes and say, look, have a look,
I just finished a project with a client who is still in the land of emailing PowerPoints back and forth. Oh, no. And I was like, how did we did this? Oh, this is so painful. And they were sort of like, what? I tried, but I couldn't get very far.
I saw a tweet, I think it was yesterday, where somebody was like, yeah, back in the day, they did UI design in Word. And I was like, I didn't respond, but I was like, no, it wasn't that bad. I'm not that ancient.
I'm sure someone's done that, yes. But I think that that actually brings up another thing that is useful is like, tools that support both synchronous and asynchronous, seeing the same thing and working on that. Because another thing I think people have learned is not all of us are real-time people. And so some people will give much better feedback if they can digest something.
Yeah.
I always tell a story of this guy that worked for me that I would have a conversation. He'd be like, yep, totally. And then I'd come in the next day to like a 7-page email of all of these awesome points that he was not going to give me in the moment face-to-face. He's a processor. He's also more detail oriented than I am, which I need. So me recognizing like, oh, give everybody 5 minutes, really quality goes up. Again, it's that go slow to go fast thing.
Yeah. Is there any correlation to the thinking fast and slow? Kahneman?
I haven't read that. That's sitting on a stack of books, but I haven't read that one yet.
It's really good.
Yeah.
I'm really into behavioral science. I really think it's interesting. But now it turns out that it's also super manipulative and that, we probably shouldn't be using it at all. But I mean, I think that, understanding the psyche is really, really interesting. But no, it's a good book and it's an easy read also. So
I'll check that one out.
Okay, so question 4. What if collaboration becomes too much design by committee? How to prevent that from happening?
Yeah. Again, if you can set clear objectives and clear criteria and keep the democracy sessions to, can we decide whether or not we've lived up to these criteria, not what is the thing we're making? I mean, you want to be careful of not being like, I'm a designer and only I design. Mm-hmm. But I mean, you're the professional designer in this situation. So yeah, you should probably be making most of the stuff. But getting clear with people, the feedback I want for you right now is whatever meets these criteria. Keep being really clear about the questions you want people to answer at the end of the day is very useful. I also, because the Google book makes a big deal out of dot voting. And so sometimes I will dot vote, but then I will kind of make a point of like, obviously we wouldn't let dots choose the answer here. Like, again, being kind of having a sense of humor of like, we're not really in a vote on this. I also talk in the book, I have a whole chapter about roles. And so whether you're talking about a big group or a more intimate group, being really clear over who is going to make this decision, who's got the authority. If the CEO is into this review and the CEO really has, owns what happens if you make this decision, they should probably make that decision. But if it's like some design decision that's small, that's close to the team, that team should make that decision. At Cooper, we did pair design a lot. So you'd always have 2, in this case, we did 2, but even if you have 3 or 4 people, we kept one navigator and the other person was the driver. So the navigator is saying, okay, today let's work on the sign-in flow. And we know that we've got these parameters and we ran into this problem last time, and the driver can start to generate ideas to solve for that scenario. When you notice the navigator starting to lump ideas on the driver, that's probably time to like go have a cup of coffee or tea, calm down, kind of go get clear in your roles again. Because when it's the arms race of ideas, I think is when it just falls apart. And I also think it's worth being honest, not every group of people gets along. So like when it works, it's awesome. When it doesn't work, yeah, you got to muscle through it. You get an intervention, I don't know. But my experience is if you can get some good roles, get some good objectives, it'll get you past a lot of stuff.
Right. Again, back to the 5 minutes, right? Taking 5 minutes.
Yeah. Well, at Cooper, we used to actually say we had I don't remember if it was the 5 or the 15-minute rule, but whatever it was, if you were butting heads for more than some amount of time, your rule was you had to leave the room, and the very next person you saw, whether it was the janitor or Alan Cooper, you had to be like, here's the deal. What do you think? Just to practice, like explaining your idea and getting some feedback.
Right. When did you work for Alan Cooper?
I was at Cooper, I want to say 98 to 2001, 99 to 2000, somewhere in there.
Very cool. Was it fun?
I really enjoyed it. I mean, it was a magical place in that the people that were there were really wonderful. It was sort of when it was first starting to grow, and they'd put together really rich training. And so that was kind of where I got my first real training. And we had the luxury of only working on one project at a time in those pairs, like I described. We had a lot of support. So it was great. I don't know that that was like sustainable long term, just managing like headcount or whatever workflow throughout the organization. But boy, it was a nice way to design products.
Yeah, it sounds like it. My experience has mostly been, being the sole UXer of the company, pretty much. Maybe there's other designers, but, like the sole UXer working in a group of developers. I think it's really hard. It made me put up put together a meetup here in Copenhagen because, I just needed somebody to talk to.
Totally.
Yeah. So
yeah, that's rough when you're the only person who speaks your language. And
yeah, and like you said, it just felt like it's a constant fight. I just felt like I was just always, going against the stream, always just trying to, trying to shout at people and say, look, it's important. UX is super important. Now, and they weren't listening. So now that's actually how the idea of UX Copenhagen came about, is that, I was just so sick of trying to swim upstream. And then, well, long story, I had an accident where I hit my head. So I was pretty much out of the game for a while. And then I decided that instead of, me just, trying to shout to, what do you say, like at a wall or whatever, then I would just put people on stage instead and have others talk about how important it is. So that's actually the whole idea for UX, just turn it around, make it, go the other way.
Yeah.
I really love that. Yeah.
Well, I think it's, when you're the one person and everyone else is alike, that's kind of like the thing that collaboration is trying to deal with, right? Which is like getting lots of different kinds of people so that core group sees what they would normally miss because it's the like dominant point of view. And so the only advice I ever have in that is like, go find other people like you and bring them to the conversation. If they're not in the company, you're going to have to bring them in from somewhere else. But there's often people hiding out in marketing or, other areas of the company that have like a user-centered mindset at the very least, I find.
Yeah. And also something very useful in that situation is bringing the developers into a usability test, having them take notes or just listen. Yeah. It's always like, they're like, but why aren't they just pressing that button? It's right there. And you're like, because they don't see it. And there you have it.
Yeah. And no amount of wishing it might be so it's going to make it that way. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay, good stuff. All right, question 5. UX and design culture in my organization is not strong. What are the things that you can recommend doing in current situation, like everybody working remote with COVID?
Yeah, like looking to build a design culture even outside of a design org right now is probably tough. I feel like that trust that you need comes like less from transactions and more from interactions. And so this is where I would think about, is there a problem you could workshop with some developers, for example? I often find asking for help gets people in a different mindset of like, I'm going to tell you what to do. And so sometimes I'm like, hey, could you help me out with this? And let them see you at your best, enlisting them at their best. And I might pick something like maybe not the biggest problem you have on your plate right now. Like if that's like, leave the hard stuff as it is. Could you find something little, or even like, I'm going to make block prints with a bunch of people, like something fun that will help you see where people's strengths and interests and weaknesses are in a low risk way. I find socializing over Zoom, just like as you would normally say if you got together at a bar, it's too hard. It's the same 3 people kind of talk. Yeah. But if you can set up smaller, like we said, breakout groups or do some activity together where you're just, so every weekend I paint with a bunch of lovely ladies. And often it's like long stretches of silence. We're all just like on Google Meet together. But, then somebody's like, oh yeah, by the way, on Tuesday, I'm going to da-da-da, just like you would in kind of real life. And so if you can set up those spaces where there's enough dead air too, where people are just start to be themselves, that would be one thing to do. Another thing you could do is kind of go the hell route and start doing some programming, right? You could put together videos or invite speakers or do stuff that gives people, like you're entertaining them with them, but you have a mission, you have a a covert agenda.
Yeah. Right.
That's another way to do that.
Those are great tips. Thanks. Sounds awesome with painting over Google. That's funny.
Well, we had started to do it in person, and then it was like, wow, this is so healing. Like, it really is nice to have that time every week that I know that's what I'm going to do, and it's creative, and I'm fortunate.
Yeah. So here's a question from, so with chatbots, conversational AI models for most web supports, how has it impacted empathetic conversations? Get that?
That is a good question. I don't know if I know the answer to that, as in like users are no longer really even talking to people. They're talking to bots. I don't know that space that well. I guess what I would say is I think that if the bot is effective, people don't care. They've done studies to show, they made a robot and the robot delivered pizza to your table. And so they had two versions of the robot. One robot just delivered the pizza and one robot dropped one on the floor and said sorry and then went and brought the new pizza. And people overwhelmingly liked the robot that made a mistake and said sorry. It's like human nature. So that's just to say, I think we value the efficiency of the robot working, but we also value the humanity. To err is to humanity, I guess.
That's really interesting because I mean, I don't remember if there's like a study on it, but people who have the devices at home, like Google Home or Amazon's Echo, whatever, they stop saying thank you. It's like find me this and that's it. It's like Butler, do this. Where one time I was actually, I don't remember what I said. I said Google Home, play some music or something, and then for fun, I was like, thank you very much, and she goes, you're very welcome, or something, and I was like, what? I don't want that. Go away. So I think there's a fine line, isn't there?
Yeah. I mean, I do think like there are some businesses where the in-store shopping or the interaction with people is important. Like, I don't know, like I miss the bookstore. I miss the people at the bookstore. Like I can buy any book on Amazon. I have way too many books to read anyway, but there's certain interactions like that I really do miss, that I wonder if there's a how might we in there of like, if we're going to be at this for a while, how might we get some of those customer to company connections? And I don't mean with Amazon or Google, but small biz. Yeah.
Right. Well, there's a business idea for somebody.
We'll validate that hypothesis first, but.
No, it's true. I mean, this the coronavirus is really hitting us hard on our humanity, isn't it? Totally. Yeah. It's so human interaction with other people, and we can't have it. It's crazy.
It's interesting to me how quickly the shift happened. Like now when I see a group of people, I have this like, that's not right. That's not supposed to be happening. Or like, yeah, I saw a friend on the street and we both did this like,
it's terrible.
So, we've shifted, but and yeah, you have kids too. My kids are definitely, they're at a good age, they're adapting, but they're kind of starting to wonder, how long are we going to be at this?
Yeah. Oh, it's so weird. They're certainly not going to forget it.
No.
2020. Okay, here's a question. I am a young UX designer who does not have a lot of experience yet. When it comes to collaboration, I sometimes feel like my peers hold my inexperience against me when discussing. How can I help them see my inexperience as a positive thing, which makes me less biased and highly motivated? Good question.
Yeah, just call them boomers. No, just kidding.
Okay, boomer.
Yeah. No, that is a super tough situation. And I see a lot of my students in that situation too. And I actually feel bad because I feel like a lot of my advice in the book doesn't work for super junior people, because in some ways you have to have some amount of power to make yourself, truly effective in a collaboration. But what I would say is focus on delivering value, right? And so maybe you don't have to argue everything. Again, you can ask good questions, but focus on delivering value or helping people see ways to test ideas to get value. So one of my favorite stories comes from Tom Chi, who was at Yahoo, and then he got a job at Google X, and he was on the first team to work on the Google glasses. Yeah. And he was so excited. Like, he'd come in from this like Yahoo culture that he hated, and Google, so sexy. Sergey Brin is on the team. And the first day they're all talking about what color they're talking about the display, but the question comes up, what color should it be? Everyone's got a different opinion. And now Tom starts to think, wait, this is weird. Why? We've been talking about this for a long time. Like, surely we could figure out the answer to this question. And Sergey says, okay, I've got it. It's red. Because red photons take the least amount of energy, and it's always red in sci-fi. And everyone's like, good enough for me. And he's like, wait, stop. Everyone go back to your desk. You make a blue one, you make a green one, you make a yellow one, you make a red one, and let's test. He was like, he wasn't a junior person at that point, but he was certainly in a risky position in that situation. So they did that. And of course, red turns out to be the worst color for a heads-up display, because Sergey is right. They take the least amount of energy, which means they are overblown by everything else in your visual field, and you can't actually see it. So he was wrong for the right reason. So Tom calls this the guess-a-thon. And so I see this a lot with younger designers, where you're sort of watching your elders decide things for you. So I think being able to raise your hand and say, how do we know that's true? Could we test that before we invest a lot of money in that? Not, I think you're wrong, but how do we test that? Yeah. And I think what I noticed younger designers are really good at is generating lots of ideas. And because they have less experience, they're less good at knowing, oh, I can see this, that idea is like this one that I had experience with before. And so I know that's a good or a bad idea, or I think I know. So I focus on that. Focus on always generating lots of ideas and letting your team help you narrow that down. Yeah. That will show you that you're resilient and that you come up with lots of ideas.
Yes. Yeah, and I also think that there's always value in seeing things with new eyes, and a junior certainly has a whole new perspective. So definitely, it's worth listening to. But I totally get it. I get how hard it is. I mean, we've all been there.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't want to be a downer, but like, I'm definitely one of those people who has moved on to move up. And so sometimes, you do your stint for a little while and get some experience, and then, you'll take that to someone else who will see your worth.
Yeah, no, it's true.
And get a good mentor. They always say you don't pick your mentor picks you. But getting someone in your organization, even if they're not in your design group, if you can kind of make friends with somebody that can help give you some insight, or, help you find those levers, it's useful.
Yeah. That's great advice. Let me see if there's another question. We've got 2 more minutes. Okay, no more. Does anybody want to join us? Anybody want to hop on the video and ask a question, or any comments, anything? Maybe not.
Well, I would just close by saying, I think the biggest thing I've learned about collaboration is like, this is not a zero-sum game. And in fact, collaboration, like, done well, is a real boost. And we have this opportunity right now to like learn how to show up for one another, like everything from wearing a mask to, giving people the right space. And so if we can all model that for people, I think that's really useful and helpful.
Yeah. Is there a difference between collaboration, do you think, in the States and like in Europe? Have you noticed that?
A little bit. There's a hilarious website that has all these different diagrams of how decisions get made in like Japan, Sweden, Britain. I think it's fake. Like, I think it's a joke, but there's something, it's like all jokes about nationalities. There's some funniness to it. But definitely like I've had German and Belgian clients that have a very different orientation. It is less discussion and sort of democracy and a little more show data and be analytical. And, so I do think that there are some differences. I hate like defining teams by nationality though, because so many of our teams are made up of lots of different kinds of people. Like, I think it's a little hard to be like, all Japanese people are like X, but I do think that there is a lot more lip service, I would say, given in the United States to collaboration. Like it's something that's talked about but not necessarily done as much. Whereas I think some cultures maybe have a little bit more of the like, let's have people roll around in it and bring us the story. Like that's Asian cultures are very much like the team works it out and brings it to the leader who then either accepts or rejects it. But is probably less like, give me a blue thing. They're just like, I told you what to do. Did you do it? Maria's.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've noticed that even between like Denmark and Sweden, we're neighbors. But in Denmark, people are like, go into a meeting and then we'll decide some things and, all agree on something and then we'll just kind of go do it. Whereas in Sweden, I mean, of course, like you say, no, not everybody's the same, but there's a lot of consensus first. So like you'll have that first meeting and you'll agree. And like I've worked with Swedish companies and I go home from the meeting, I'm like, all right, when do we start? But then they're like, yeah, let's have a new meeting because we need to, be sure that everybody agrees. And like, we already did agree. So it's really funny. I mean,
I think Maria is trying to say
like
something here.
4 miles between.
I think Maria is trying to jump in here too.
You need to unmute. You have to unmute, Maria.
Yeah. Well, I'm crazy. I'm crazy with this Zoom. Thank you for your time, both of you. I would just like to ask a question. As a freelance web designer, can you hear me? Yes?
Mm-hmm.
As a freelance web designer, I for the last, I think some 7, 8 years, maybe to 10, I'm sending to the clients, like I'm not sending mockup, just designing in the browser, and it's so much better. You're finishing it with 2 days, and if you send a mockup, then it will last for 5 to 7 days. What do you think about that? I'm sending it in index HTML via browser, via link. And they say, oh, it's working on the cell phone, on the laptop, and when you send an image, they say, okay. And then like, at the very moment I'm sending it like that, and I'm finishing within 2 weeks, the whole job. So what do you think?
Yeah. I think that is a really interesting insight. And I think that people, it's like the sunk cost thing. Like if they feel like it's closer to done, then it's like, well, I've got it. Do I really need to nitpick this, as opposed to, if it's a picture, well, I assume you can then change it. So I would say sometimes there's times when you actually do want them to look at the picture and poke at it and tell you what's wrong with it. And there's also times when you're like, just, we're done, ship it.
Yeah, but it's so easier, within 2 days. And when I'm updating it, I'm updating it in the code. So if they want to change the image, if they want to change an image, I'm changing it in the code itself.
Mm-hmm.
So it's much easier. The code, the navigation, the color, it's all in CSS, it's all in HTML. And then like, if they want WordPress, you finish it in a day, it's in responsive frameworks and so on. To me, it's quite an interesting, and the clients are understanding better user experience. And they are testing all the devices. The best experience I had with the people from USA, with the clients. You have all these devices, and then you ask me the question like, Maria, well, it's not working on this and that device. And I'm telling them, I don't have that device. Because, I have 3 devices. But it's funny. And it was a great experience with the American clients, I must admit, yes. As far as still now, yeah. So thank you.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Designing in the code, it's and that user experience and that kind of collaboration. Not every client is a great client. I mean, there are clients that they say, I want a bigger logo and this and that, but you have to take your time and think about it. But actually, at the end of the day, they agree.
But I think your example of like, I'm going to update this image live in the code while they watch is also them getting to see, oh, you heard me, you did it. It like, you don't want to do this every single thing, obviously, but you like validated their thing too. And they think you're a genius because you did it in code in 2 seconds, right?
Yeah, yeah. So,
Jonathan, are you trying to get in here too?
uh-huh.
Do you want to be unmuted? Can you unmute?
Does Jonathan,
I don't think
does
he's
Jonathan have a
unmuted.
question? No.
No.
No,
Just
thanks.
saying hi. Hi. Good to
Anybody
see you. Jonathan
Yeah.
and I work together at PG&E.
Okay.
Quite a ride.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I'll bet. Well, this has been so much fun. Thank you so much for your time, Gretchen.
You're so welcome.
And
It's so great to hear from you.
wonderful to hear all about you. Yeah, thanks. So
I
will
can't
look
wait to
forward
come.
inviting you to Copenhagen. I hope it's here.
I can't
I
wait
hope
to
it's here.
come.
Maybe, I think, I think for now, at least, I think 2021 is going to be online. Because, I mean, I don't want people flying. I would, can you imagine if I host a conference for 200 people and they all get sick? I mean, I would never forgive myself. So, we'll consider if you want to come for 2021 or if you want to wait till next year so that you can be here in person.
Will do.
Definitely we'll have you on stage sometime soon. Yeah.
Awesome.
And I really think it would fit in very well.
Well, I love what you're doing. And
any last questions from me? Thank you. Thanks.
Anyone else?
That's great to hear.
A question. I always have questions. I just want to ask one more. So what do you think when cooperating with the car clients? I mean, how far we can go if some client isn't, you're doing the project and in the middle of the project, they say, let's change all. I mean, like how far we can go with regard to that? What is the edge of that?
Yeah, I mean, I like collaborating with clients. You have to, obviously some clients are better at it than others. And maybe the way I think about it is sometimes I'm actually going to workshop with them and co-create, but sometimes I'm just going to make sure I'm always showing work in progress. Like I'm never trying to show something that I think is done because, I mean, obviously at some point it gets done, but showing people work in progress, even if they aren't going to get into super detail with you, builds that buy-in over time. Depending on how often you're collaborating with them, you might need to, like the next time you see them, you have to kind of, again, previously on Lost, we did this, now we're going to do that. I always find it works really well. And even when I've done it perfectly, like I've had the experience where I brought my work in progress in and they go, yep, it's still like, it was still worth that check, right? Because the times when they say, wait, you forgot about this thing, I'm like, whew, thank God. You caught that. So, I would make sure you always have at least one chance for them to, again, put their fingerprints on things because it'll tend to go faster in the end. And once you've worked, I have clients I've been working with now for 5 years, 8 years. It's not, how you get to that point where you just trust one another and you can just move very quickly. So that's what you can aim for.
Thank you very much. It is the great point. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. It was so lovely to see you all.
All right. And you too. Thank you again for your time. It's been really, really lovely to meet you. And I really look forward. I just hope that when we meet, we can hug.
Yes. All right.
All right.
Thank you for your time, all.
Thank you, everybody. Take great care. I will send out an email with links of stuff we've been talking about. Of course, a link to Gretchen's book and a link to next conversation, which is on October 7th with Nisha, who is actually online also. So I'm really looking forward to that. Thanks, everybody, for joining in.